Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. I'm Ray Myers, welcome to Craft vs. Cruft, and of course, we are doing this year the year of domain-specific languages, DSLs, and we are halfway through covering regular expressions, did that last week, and what I wanted to do this weekend here was go through writing a context-free grammar for the syntax of regular expressions. Before we get back to that, I wanted to address a conversation that's been happening and kind of stoked last Monday by the CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, who was speaking at an event on the future of U.S. AI leadership by the Council on Foreign Relations. And I watched the entire hour-long interview, made sure I got all the context, but the quote that you may have seen going around.
What we are finding is we are not far from a world, I think we'll be there in 3 to 6 months, where AI is writing 90% of the code. And then in 12 months, we may be in a world where AI is writing essentially all of the code.
In 12 months, we may be in a world where AI is writing essentially all the code. Now, essentially, we're declaring programming to be over is how I'm summarizing that, and I don't know. That's kind of a fun thought experiment. Like, if this were your last year writing code, what would you do? What code would you want to write in your last year of writing code, at least as anything other than a curiosity, a recreation, like we're collecting stamps or something, which I would probably still do. Now, I don't particularly believe this, but the fact that there are narratives like this about ours and many professions that are being put out with essentially billions of speculative dollars behind them means there are going to be people trying to make various versions of this happen.
I do have a fair amount of concern about this.
I think this is kind of a situation worth taking seriously, and this person's actively inviting us to take these possibilities seriously as well. So I think I really am taking this in the spirit in which it was offered. Now, a lot of people are asking, did he even mean it? Did he mean it in the sense in which it sounds? Because, mind you, he's talking to a general audience. He's not talking to a bunch of software engineers in a conversation in which they're getting into, kind of arcane details of the trade, right? So an average person is going to say, like, AI coding, then that means no one's doing anything remotely approximating that role. That's where you could easily leap. He hedges a little bit after that. I watched the entire hour-long interview a couple times, actually, and although it doesn't talk on software that much, he does say...
But the programmer still needs to specify, what is the overall app you're trying to make? What's the overall design decision?
There's going to be people still watching it happen and doing what he describes as a small part of the role, the part that's not actively typing.
So as long as there are these small pieces that a human programmer needs to do that the AI isn't good at, I think human productivity will actually be enhanced.
I don't consider that to be a small part. I consider it to be the majority. He hedges a little bit, but then he quickly says, but we're going to be on a path to where even that's going to be going away on no particular timeline.
I think that eventually all those little islands will get picked off by AI systems. And then we will eventually reach the point where, the AIs can do everything that humans can. And I think that will happen in every industry.
Like, he's saying a lot of much more grandiose thing about this and many other jobs. Like, for instance, that we might see 100 years of medical progress play out inside of 5 years, but we might not be able to do that if we don't, influence all the regulations in certain ways. There's a lot of very impactful stuff being thrown around. So, I don't really buy the notion that he's intending to make any kind of conservative statement when he says that essentially all the code will be written by AI in a year. So, did he mean this with his full chest? Yes. I think emphatically, he is meaning to assert and ask us to reckon with a possibility that's in the ballpark of what he's saying. Even if it may be, kind of a more elaborate chain of events. So we have questions. Now, I made this post the other day, and it actually did way better than I expected. For me, this is a very successful post. It's kind of still barreling along. I think about 20,000 impressions on LinkedIn. I'm usually not that high profile. And, I just want to respectfully say, I like their products. Claude Sonnet 3.7 is probably the state-of-the-art coding model right now. 3.5 is very good as well. Don't want to disparage what they're offering overall, but in terms of what's being said, I have just a couple simple challenges here. Kill one mainframe, meaning successfully replace the software running in one mainframe. Let us know how you achieve that, and then update your timeline of your prediction, right? That is orders of magnitude easier than what is being claimed here, arguably, depending on how you interpret it. And this is actually a highly relevant challenge. We act like it's not, but 50% of the GDP of the United States is tied up in companies that are still dependent on mainframes in some capacity. If that seems too big, here's a much smaller scope challenge. Rewrite the tech command. So there's this typesetting language called tech, which you may have heard of the package around it, LaTeX, which is used for many areas of academic papers and textbooks. It was created in the 70s and 80s by Don Knuth, author of this amazing book series here. Just in order to make that book series, he invented digital typography. We're still using at the core essentially the version of tech from 1982 that is powering all this. It is a relatively small code base, under 40,000 lines. It is very stable and is exceedingly well documented. It is possibly one of the best documented code bases in existence. It actually uses its own typesetting system to compile the source into both a program and a book about how the program works. That's a system called literate programming, which Knuth invented. And yet, we would like to have a compatible new version of this. This is in modern technologies. The old version, builds to some old version of Pascal. We have to do increasingly insane things to even get this to build. So can we rewrite this in idiomatic Rust? It's a surprisingly hard problem. It's a small, well-defined code base, but it is an advanced one. Could your AI that replaces all of human coding do this as a case study? I'm sure the people in the Tectonic project who are already working on this tech rewrite in Rust would greatly appreciate it. Little side note here, as I was doing this, I was looking up something called the tech book, which is about tech, and I accidentally pasted into some Copilot feature in my browser part of the words the tech book, and it came out as "Hey Tech Boo." And Copilot responded. I only noticed this morning that it was still there. It thought it was some pet name that I was giving. Like, ooh, is that your nickname? That's charming. How can I brighten your night? Like, I was like, hey, tech boo. No, I meant the tech book. Anyway, I put up that kind of contrarian post about AI and legacy code. It was just the sort of thing I do. And it got a little more exposure than I'm used to. A lot of people were very positive with me and actually trying to dunk on that CEO a lot harder than I was trying to do. But when you get a post that gets a little broader audience than you're used to, you're going to get people that come at you with a lot of negativity sometimes and just do not understand where you're coming from. They're not your normal readers. You got to kind of learn to expect that. And for instance, this person had this to say: "You are so completely missing the big picture here that it physically hurts to read this post. I don't think I have the words to realign you other than the glaring mistake you're making is thinking that the next paradigm of software is built on classic programming languages." All right, well, look, it doesn't feel good to be talked to in this way. But talking about AI and legacy code and really criticizing, or questioning AI in any way, over the past few years, I have been talked to this way and much worse many, many times. It seems to be what happens. My goal is to engage here and to try and drive conversation. I have to be just willing to take some things on the chin. That's what I've resolved to do. Remember, new readers are not familiar with the things you've said in the past. Someone might not be aware that I've been very ardently trying to consider the big picture for the last 2 years, and I put out a lot of material on this. I say a different line from the Tao Te Ching at the end of every video. You should really read the whole thing. For example, I have just 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, compassion. These 3 are your greatest treasures. I don't know about you, but like the stuff in there helps me kind of center, and when I feel like someone's coming at me, can allow me to try and turn it into a productive dialogue, which I think I was able to do. I kind of took that on the chin, and we ended up having a very pleasant conversation about, what the scenarios he was seeing were. And I think there are a lot of different visions. Like, what are we even talking about? If he says AI is doing all the coding, what does that even mean? First of all, I don't consider coding and programming and software engineering to be interchangeable concepts. We might casually use it that way, and he was speaking to a general audience, so he was using it interchangeably in that situation. But I think ultimately these are tasks that contain each other but have very different challenges. For a treatment on coding versus programming, Leslie Lamport is my influence on that, and this is a good talk that he's done, and he specifically addresses in this talk what parts of that situation he sees large language models more helpful and less helpful for. So, a Turing Award winner, also the law and La Tech, not the only opinion, but one worth listening to. And expanding from there, software engineering occurs with challenges of scale and managing real world needs and risks. And, it's a social process. There's a lot going on there. We have research on how developers spend their time. And surprise, surprise, it is not all in coding. So if you make coding 50% faster, are you making the entire process 50% faster? I'd argue we know pretty definitively that you're not. So you got to kind of explain what happens with the rest of the situation. What's going on with the bottlenecks? However, there is a large and credible contingent that does agree that some form of huge disruption is in the process of happening in software engineering. I've identified at least 6 scenarios that are in the conversation, and in service of aligning the dialogue, I will try and break those down for you now. 1, I call extreme completion. This is essentially your Copilot cursor style autocomplete, just sort of taken to more and more situations where more and more of the code we're able to just kind of gesture and it's filling in the blanks for us. But programmers are still pretty close to the situation. This doesn't really fundamentally change the work. It does streamline a lot of it. But at scale, you kind of have the same roles and responsibilities you do today. Most people believe this will happen to some degree. We have versions of this already. Millions of people have adopted them. They have weaknesses which are improving. We have paths to improve them. Agents are taking it a little farther. It's just a question of how far it goes. So this is kind of the most conservative scenario we're dealing with. Number 2 is the most extreme, the dev-ocalypse. Ultimately, there is nothing even approaching what we now think of as a programmer role. Many people do believe this. It is the subject of, the strongest doubt as well. And mind you, it's only the dev-ocalypse from our point of view. If it actually happens, then it's the innovator's paradise scenario. A lot of people really, really want this to happen and would view our skepticism about it happening as just trying to preserve our jobs. But I just don't think my skepticism is solely rooted in that. I've had to relearn my job many, many times throughout my career. That is kind of our reality in the field, especially, me as a DevOps person. But if we create the innovator's paradise, then people with ideas will not need us in order to accomplish those ideas. From their perspective, that sounds really, really great. If that is a real dream, we should do it. It would be a good thing. Ultimately, that is programming fulfilling its own destiny, I think. That is completing the project. The objection to it would be that it's not realistic. Not that it's not desirable. It probably is. So the criticism of this one is largely that it might be a false dream. And extraordinary evidence is required to show that it will scale because it seems to work disproportionately well in little demos. Scenario number 3 is the abstraction leap. So this is still somewhat conservative. I kind of like this one. And that is essentially the idea of the extreme version of it would be, well, we used to write assembly language directly. And then we made compilers, and now we write in high-level programming languages. So perhaps there's another leap of that caliber, right? Some people have said LLMs are the new compilers. I don't think LLMs are like compilers, but maybe it puts us on the way to doing something like that. And there becomes something sort of just as much easier than using a current high-level language as using that high-level language was versus using assembler. I mean, and then there are like lots of incremental degrees of that we could have. I kind of believe in a lesser scenario that is still abstraction leap. I think we have lots still to do in abstraction in programming. You know, that is why it is the year of DSLs on this channel, domain-specific languages. That is a form of abstraction leap we've had a lot of success with. Can we continue to get better at doing that? And abstraction leap code is still ultimately making a lot of this tick, and perhaps the thing at the top is code, just better code. But nonetheless, we have, you know, maybe a qualitative improvement in what we're able to get done. Scenario number 4 is uncharted waters. We end up with programming paradigms enabled now that don't even resemble code as we understand it. What roles do we need? What are its characteristics? What can we build? Nothing we know properly informs our answer to this. So the commenter from earlier seemed to be operating under a belief in scenario number 4, you know, to which I just, well, I want to see it, you know, like we need to chart the waters before we can start making bets. Number 5, the review economy. So essentially, this is a potential byproduct of extreme completion, for instance, where the AI output is able to be much more productive in some senses that we are, but we still have to check it a lot. We're still combing through it, and kind of the bottleneck in our trade becomes just us sort of screening through and finding problems in the AI output. This strikes a lot of people as kind of distasteful. It puts us in the position of doing a lot of just aggravating menial work. There's definitely already some truth to this one. You know, there have been situations where this AI output has created these review bottlenecks, and I don't see it so much as an end game. You know, it's sort of, if we're not careful, this is the local maximum you end up in, and you need to manage your bottlenecks more carefully. Finally, to many of us, the scariest possibility, the infinite pile of garbage. In this scenario, we have premature adoption of AI coding systems that have essentially filled production with low quality, unsustainable solutions. The software infrastructure society depends on gets worse and less tractable to fix over time instead of better. AI enables us to grow the pile of software to such a size and complexity that neither we nor AI are able to deal well with. So this is kind of an ecological disaster scenario. So there you go. We have extreme completion, devocalypse, or innovator's paradise, abstraction leap, uncharted waters, review economy, infinite pile of garbage. Now, these interact in various ways. For instance, we've already agreed that extreme completion, kind of the most conservative view here, might lead to review economy. Many of us are concerned that if we attempt to reach scenario 2, we will actually reach infinite pile of garbage. A lot of my motivation in this space has been to warn against that kind of scenario. In terms of the scenario that I'd be in favor of, I think maybe my view is closest to extreme completion and combined with abstraction leap. We develop carefully better building blocks, and then we still have these nice completion tools to use kind of in concert with them. So that dovetails very well into the year of DSLs theme. So these scenarios interact, and the plot thickens beyond that. We've talked about the debate of which of these scenarios are real, if even desirable, and which might be false promises that could have a lot of negative effects. We've talked about how there are multiple endgames, and they're not going to be evenly distributed either. I think to whatever degree disruption does happen, it's going to affect different areas of software differently. This is a vast, vast field with a lot of different kinds of challenges. And I think the undercurrent here, there is at the heart of this a thinly disguised labor dispute. How do we treat people who have diligently learned the skills that were required for a certain situation? If we consider it normal that the skills required change, do we not help them reskill? Do we not find ways we can continue to have a valuable relationship with those people? If we don't do that, we can't say AI made us do it. We have only ourselves to blame for the way we treat each other. What I want to leave you with is, as software engineers, we have the expertise and we have a say in what happens. I have seen a lot of people speak, whether enthusiastically or fearful. I've seen people speak of some coming disruption as though it is just some meteor that is coming to hit us. We will build the future. We get a say. What is the goal? What do we want as a society out of software? How do we want it to be? Do we want quality to go up, or do we not care where quality goes? Do we want there to be more programmers such that anyone could be, or do we want no one to be? These are not really the same thing. I want a lot of things out of software. I want it to work well. I want it to be tractable to work on over time by the people who need to do it. I want it to provide value to users and the people ultimately who are making it. And I want people who work together to treat each other well. If we can at least be on the same page about what we want, usually it's easier to deliberate on the best ways of getting there. These are some other videos which I will link a playlist to where I have discussed similar things if you've enjoyed this. I range from very skeptical to very enthusiastic. Skeptical means being open to evidence, remember, but requiring it. Thank you very much. And as Lao Tzu said, with patience, the most tangled cord may be undone.